Okay, let's begin. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining from. Welcome to Cloud Data Driven Online User Group meeting. And today we have Jon here talking about Fabric write back and data manipulation with Power Apps and Fabric SQL database. Ooh, that's an interesting topic. I'm really looking forward to this topic. So a little bit about the data-driven community here. We have two different branches. One is the user group itself, and the other is the Future Data-Driven Summit, which we are going to have on September 24th this month. So if you do not register yet for this event, I highly suggest you to go ahead and register. Go to the Future Data-Driven Summit website and register for the event. It's a day-long event, free and virtual as well. We talk about a lot of topics about SQL Server, Fabric, AI, and whatnot. A lot of topics. So you can see the schedule itself on our website as well. So for more information, simply check in the community website. I will also add the link in the chat in a couple of minutes. Scroll down the page a little bit on our home page. On the left side of the page, you can notice the information about the Future Data Driven Summit itself. This is an annual joint meeting where we have several multiple user groups, data platform user groups as our partners. And the second branch, like I said, it's a data-driven user group like we are having today. And you are more than welcome to contact any of the community board members here. My name is Deepthi Goguri, and I'll be hosting this session today. I'm a database administrator. I also am a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. I'm a third co-admin of the data-driven community, and I'll be hosting this meeting today. You are more than welcome again to contact the other two community board members. Jean Joseph is actually the founder and the secondary co-admin, and Ronan is the primary co-admin. Together, we are here to help serve the data platform community. During the meeting, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put it in the chat window, and I'll be looking forward for those questions. And in a couple of intervals in between the session, maybe I'll check with the speaker to ask those questions. And you are more than welcome to use the reactions as well. If you like something, please do not hesitate to put the like, love buttons. And I'm so honored to introduce our guest speaker today, Jon. Jon is a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, and also he's a international speaker. He's also a trainer and consultant, and he's a founder of Fabric Symposium. So, Jon, please welcome, and you can go ahead and share a little bit more words about yourself, and you can also share your screen at this point of time.
Thank you so much, Dipti. I hope you can see my screen here. I'm super excited to be joining you at this user group today. It's about a year and a half since I last joined this user group for a quite similar topic. Back then, we were discussing Fabric Writeback with Power Apps as well, but that was with a foundation on a Fabric data warehouse. And since then, we've gotten the Fabric SQL Databases artifact, which makes this functionality a lot easier to achieve, frankly. So I'm here today to talk about that integration, the difference towards that old paradigm, and show you a lot of live demos of how to do that. Then we also sprinkle a little advanced stuff on top and talk about how you can leverage stored procedures to do data manipulation in your Fabric SQL database backend, orchestrated from this Power App embedded in Power BI. So lots of good stuff for you guys to look forward to. You said most of the important things about me, so I'll keep this very short. My name is Jon, or Jon. That's the Danish way of saying it. It's 6 in the evening here where I'm sitting in Copenhagen, Denmark. So I've postponed my dinner a little with my girlfriend, but super excited to get this chance to speak to you guys. If what I'm talking about today interests you, feel free to reach out. Find me on LinkedIn. I'll happily spar with you on solutions like the one I'm going to show you today. And I have a blog, downhilldata.com, where I write about these topics especially. It's my passion, Power BI and Fabric and the Power Platform working in unison together. And I love discussing those things with the community. So feel free to get in touch. I more or less covered the agenda on the title slide, but here it is just for you again. We're in the middle of the introduction, and I'm going to dive straight into what's the deal with Power Apps and Fabric SQL databases. So this topic as a whole, why even bother with Power Apps and SQL databases? And well, for me, the key thing to understand here is that lots of people have been requesting write-back solutions for Power BI since the dawn of Power BI. And when I talk about write-back, what do I mean? Well, this idea that an end user of a Power BI report should not only be able to consume data, but they should also be able to create data and input data right in their Power BI reports, like they're used to doing in Excel or other web applications. And technically, this is a little difficult to do, right? Because in itself, the semantic model reads data, right? It doesn't write data. So what you need is for Power BI to have some kind of window out into the rest of the cloud world, right? To APIs or whatnot. And there are different ways of doing that. You could buy third-party tools, external tools, install third-party visualizations in Power BI that allow you to do this. But if you want to do this natively, up until recently, the only way of doing it within the Microsoft sphere itself was to use Power Apps. Now, back in May, translytical task flows were announced at Microsoft Build, the conference, which is another way of doing write back to Fabric that's maybe a little more technical. You'll need to know some Python. But if you want to do low code write back, so if you're just a Power BI user and you want to do write back, Power Apps is still the way to go. So in this session today, we'll cover uh, why you should do this and how you can accomplish it. Some common use cases for write-back. The most common is maybe doing sort of comment annotation solutions inside of reports, so letting users attach comments to individual data points. But it could also be forecasting scenarios, budgeting scenarios, letting users see data on one half of the screen and input data on the other. I've built lots of to-do lists in Power BI. You need to input data for these 100 items, and then they have an interface on the right where they can do this write back. I have some examples we can discuss throughout the session. So before we show how to build the Power App, there's a little bit of a discussion I want to highlight to you, and that is since I'm talking Fabric SQL databases today with you, and a year and a half ago I was talking about Fabric warehouses as the backend of choice for write-back solutions in Fabric. You can perhaps say that there is a bit of a discussion which of these backend engines should you be using. And it's not so easy necessarily to choose which backend artifact and storage mode, for that matter, that you should use for your semantic models. The questions that you should be asking yourselves are the ones that are up on the screen here. You need to approach this from, first and foremost, a business point of view, and also from a technical point of view, right? So in terms of your report and write-back solution, you need to maybe consider your existing architecture. And if you're already a heavy user of Fabric warehouses, maybe it's good enough to stay within that paradigm. If you, on the other hand, have business considerations that require your data, your write-back data to land in one lake instantly, or perhaps a small delay is acceptable, that might influence your decision. And then, of course, there's also the technical competencies of the people developing these solutions to take into account, right? If your developers they are all low-code developers, then one solution might be better than another, and if they speak Python, then maybe another one works better for them, right? You also, to some extent, need to consider costs, but you are paying for a Fabric capacity, and all of the solutions I'm showing today are not crazy expensive or anything. They are feasible, all of them. So just to give you guys a little bit of a brief comparison metric that you matrix that you can reference here, what's the difference between SQL databases, warehouses, and lakehouse artifacts as backend items, storage artifacts for your write-back solutions? Well, um, if you require data to land in one lake instantly, then something like the warehouse is better than the alternatives because it natively works with SQL to insert this data and inject it into your SQL warehouse instantly. And as long as your report is using direct query, the data shows up in your report instantly for the user as well. The data will also show up instantly if you use direct query to a Fabric SQL database, but the data will not land in one lake instantly because there's a little bit of mirroring magic going on to turn the SQL, the transactional SQL database data into Parquet files in one lake. So if you have, I don't know, a data science or AI project that requires that whatever write-back inputs you make in your write-back solution arrives in one lake instantly, you need to use the warehouse. But if you're good enough, if it's good enough that there's a delay for the data to land in one lake, but it's okay, but you want it still to be instant in Power BI, the SQL database is just as good, if not even better. The lakehouse is a little bit of an odd one. Um, it's it's difficult to do write back to lakehouses directly from Power Apps and from Power BI. You'll need to also use Power Automate to make it work, and that's a little bit complex. But there are ways around it, and I've included it here just because if your solution architecture in Fabric only involves lakehouses and you have a policy to only ever use lakehouses, of course it's possible. Quickly on costs here. The good thing about SQL databases, while they're fast, they're also a little expensive because the Fabric compute costs of SQL databases are quite high as compared to, for example, the warehouse. But all of the solutions here, they also suffer from the downside that they do require Power Apps licensing. All of your users, they will need Power Apps premium licenses, and for the Lakehouse solution, you'll even need Power Automate licenses as well. If you're looking for a solution that doesn't use Power Platform licenses at all, you will need to look at this new preview feature called Translytical Task Flows that I briefly mentioned before, but that's outside the scope of this presentation. Personally, my preference for choosing a backend here is that the Fabric SQL database, it just works out of the box. It's a lot simpler to work with if you are a low-code Power BI developer. You don't need to jump through any crazy hoops, neither in your connection setup nor in your development flow. They are a preview item, so if you're not into that, the warehouse is your second best bet, if you ask me. And then thirdly, the lakehouse, if you have no other option, then that can still work. That's a personal preference, of course, the slide right here. So how do you do this? How do you connect Power Apps to Fabric SQL databases? We'll cover that first, and then we'll cover how do we put that into a Power BI report. So I'm going to jump over to my browser, and I've gone ahead here, and I've gone to make.powerapps.com. Nothing crazy here. This is the place where you create your Power Apps. And if you are familiar with Power BI, the interface should feel a little similar, right? It's like most of the Microsoft Cloud products these days, navigation-wise. And if you want to create a simple Power App that interacts with your Fabric backend, you can go ahead and create a new app and start with a blank Canvas app here. It needs to be a Canvas app if we want to do write back. Technically, you could do custom pages and model-driven apps, but they are impossible to embed in Power BI. So if your end goal is write back in Power BI, you need to use Power Apps Canvas apps. This is the Power Apps Designer, which might be unfamiliar to those of you. So we're going to do a super quick tour here. This is the screen on which we drag and drop items into the screen. We can color and insert labels to display, pretty easily edit and create simple add functionality. We can do all kinds of formatting like you're used to, change the size of the fonts, change the color, add all kinds of inputs, that kind of stuff, right? And if I want to connect a data source so that I can consume and read data from this data source inside of my Power App, I will need to, in this left-hand side of things, where right now I'm in the tree view where I can see all the things I have on my app, there's also a tab called Data. And on this Data tab, I can click Add Data, I can look for SQL Server, and in here I can add a connection so I can log in with my Microsoft credentials or SQL Server credentials if you were using a SQL Server. But for Fabric, we'll just use single sign-on. I can connect with that, and then it asks me for a SQL Server name and a SQL database name. And if you've been working a little with Fabric and connectivity, and maybe you've even seen my demonstration a year and a half ago, you might know that there are ways to get the SQL connection string of your warehouses, your lakehouses, your SQL databases in Fabric. The way you can grab that is if you go into an item like a SQL DB here, it would be the same for the warehouse, and you click on these settings. There's a connection string here to be found that you can use to connect. Frankly, I need to go to the SQL Analytics endpoint to get something that I can just copy straight away. Settings. Oh, was a little fast there. It's a connection SQL endpoint, and I get a SQL connection string. The thing that has changed with SQL databases compared to warehouses, and this is a little confusing, is you should not use this connection string. If you accidentally use this SQL connection string, you will achieve a connection to your SQL database in Fabric, but it will be read-only because the SQL Analytics endpoint is read-only. You need to instead, and this is super important, you need to instead go into the SQL DB, click Open In, and choose SQL Server Management Studio. And here you get a slightly different server name and a database name, both of which you will need to connect to the SQL database in Power Apps. There is a secondary way of getting this string. You don't necessarily need to find that weird open in option. You can also find the dot menu out in your workspace, scroll down and find open in SSMS, and you get the same pop-up. So I can copy this server name, paste it in, copy my database name, paste it in, click connect, and all of a sudden I'm allowed to connect to and display data sources that I have in this SQL DB. So if I connect to this sales data, I can see it appear in my data, and I can now insert a gallery and use this source as my items property in a gallery and display relevant data here. This item dot, I don't know, sales. I can see sales by customer. And I haven't formatted this. I'm not intending to use this super quick demo for anything visual. It was just to show you how do you create a new Power App and how do you connect to a Fabric data source with read and write capabilities. We'll get back to the writing part in a second, but this was all about the connectivity. Now, the second thing I want to show you is, okay, let's say you spend some time building a Power App. How do you get this into a Power BI report? Well, you will need to go into Power BI and create some kind of Power BI report. I have here, let me just delete this for a second. Let me actually just make a duplicate of this one. I've made a super simple Power App here, which connects to my SQL DB and just visualizes sales by customer from my sales tables. And maybe I wanted to build that common solution, but it could also be that I wanted to do like a master data write back, editing master data in my backend application inside of Power BI. That's something we could do. The best way to get started with this is actually to work with Power BI in the browser and not in Power BI desktop. The reason for that is because there's some pretty nice connectivity where you can see the context that you're selecting in Power BI while developing your Power App, and that doesn't really work if you're using Power BI desktop. So I'll actually encourage you for once to use the Power BI editor in your browser. And the way it works is that you'll need to find the Power Apps for Power BI visualization and insert that into your Power BI report. For a start, this visualization will be entirely blank, and that's because you will need to feed it at least one column from your data model. I could, for example, decide to say, well, I want my customer name or some equivalent to appear. Let me just see. I'm using company name in this example. All right, let's do that. Company name. And as soon as I do that, I get the chance to either create a new app or choose an existing app. So if you already built your app beforehand and you want to connect that to Power BI and then resume building, you're going to use Choose App. But you can also start from scratch, and you don't even need to go to makeThatPowerApps.com and click create and all that. You can actually skip those steps if you go ahead and click create new here. In this case, I have, cooking show magic and all that already pre-created a little bit of an app here. Right back to Fabric SQL DB, and I can add this to my interface, and I now have a Power App here. Once my Power App is in my report, I can open the app in edit mode side by side with my Power BI report, and you'll be able to see why it's smart to do this in the browser. You'll be able to see this context being passed between them. Because what happens when you open a Power App from within Power BI is that it creates actually an additional data connection between Power BI and your Power App. So in here, you'll see I have a Power BI integration element on here. It's a little confusing. It doesn't end up in the data screen. It's going to show up here in my tree view. But what this is that it's actually a data source. This data source right here is the equivalent of the underlying table under my Power App. Essentially, this visualization right here, under the hood, it's just a table visual. It's a list of all of the columns that I've put inside of this table visual. And I'm not sure why this is not loading at all. Maybe I'll need to refresh the page, but it should just give me a list of, here's a list of all the company names. And these are the ones that will be accessible inside of my Power App. Let me show you how. So if I went ahead and actually put a gallery in here, just like we did before, excuse me for this being a little bit ugly. If I change the items property of my gallery, I can use Power BI integration .data, and then it will show all of my different, these are all of the things you saw in my Power BI report. These are all the company names that were in there. So I'm using Power BI as a read data source for my Power App right now. And this link is filterable. It's context aware. So if I choose one particular company here and filter, you saw my table got filtered here. If this works perfectly, it's supposed to filter here. It doesn't always work, but it's supposed to show that I only selected one of these items here. If I go back into Power Apps, you'll see one way I've implemented this is that you'll see this changes every time I select a new item over here. And that works because of that exact integration. The way it's done technically, just to give you a little bit of introduction to Power Apps, what I've done on this screen, you see this app is capable of doing write back, and it has five things on here. I have a label, so I go ahead and insert a text label, and I say selected company. So I can put a label in like that, and then I formatted it white and everything. And then I put in a text input. And then as its item, as its default property, I went ahead and say, well, just grab the first item coming from Power BI and select the company name column and display it here. If I had multiple columns in the Power BI report, I could have chosen between different ones. If I was using a gallery like I showed you before, I would have been able to show multiple columns at once and basically show a table in my Power App if I wanted to. And the reason I'm doing this is because, well, this is a master data write back application. So I want to take this company name and say, well, actually, this company name, or this company, they changed their name. Perhaps the Trailblazing Sports, and you can see I made a test earlier, right? Perhaps Trailblazing Sports is now called something else. Maybe Trailblazing Sports version 2. This is very unimaginative, but maybe I want to rename this, right? And I can go ahead and I can click save. And you see the name changed. The name changed in my report after I clicked the save button. And the way that works is because the app that I was just showing you, we've done the exact same thing. We've connected to a SQL server in here. So in my data sources, you'll see I've connected to a SQL server, just like I showed you in the beginning, this time to the exact same table that my Power BI report is using. This Power BI report is built on a semantic model with a direct query into the Fabric SQL database. And because I'm using the Power App to overwrite, in fact, update the individual record in my dimension table in the Fabric SQL DB, that data gets pushed to my Power BI report instantaneously. And that unlocks a host of possibilities, right? I can write comments like we said before, but it could also be, as I mentioned, like a to-do list. So you could have different items that you need to complete. You fill in your numbers, your dates, your qualitative information, click save, and all of this data goes into your data model, and you get a nice little check mark saying you completed this item. So you can almost build like web-like applications using your semantic models like this. That's the way it all works. Just to show you what does the actual how do you actually save the data to the SQL database? What did I not do in here? Well, I didn't make a save button, right? So here I have a save button, and this is where you will need to do a little bit of coding, right? So I'm using a formula that exists in the PowerFX language, which is the coding language, the low-code coding language of Power Apps. It has a function called update if, where I say in my data source sales LT customer, check if there is a company name that's equal to that exact company name that the user has been selecting in Power BI. And if there is one, well, update it with whatever the user had inputted in my text input. So I'm referencing here the name of that text input control that I have right here. That's all there is to it. I say update if you find an existing company name, update it to the new value provided by the user. And then this little magic formula here is performing a visual refresh in my Power BI report so that it knows to fetch new data through the direct query connection. And that's how this entire thing works. These are the few tricks that you'll need to know. You'll need to know that you need to use the Power Apps for Power BI visualization to either start from scratch and create a new app or embed an existing app that you've made. You'll want to leverage the Power BI integration element to show things that the user is selecting in Power BI through clever use of first Power BI integration.data.company name to display those fields that you've added to your Power Apps visual. And then you'll want to use update if, or you can use a formula called patch. You can look that up as well to write this new data into your Fabric SQL database. And then, of course, you need to remember that to set up that connection in the first place to the Fabric SQL database, you will need to grab that special server and database name that I showed you how in the beginning. So those are the building blocks that you need to know to get started with the basics of write back to Fabric SQL DB. Why is this a little bit of a game changer with Fabric SQL DBs? Well, the thing is, if you were using a warehouse, a Fabric SQL, a Fabric data warehouse, you will not be able to find that special server address and database name. You'd only be able to find the one for the SQL endpoint. And well, while that endpoint is technically read and write, Power Apps has a weird, I'm not sure if it's weird, but it has a limitation that you can only write to data sources that have enforced primary keys on the tables you try to write to. And guess what? Fabric data warehouses do not support enforced primary keys. So there is no way to do direct writes the way I'm showing you here. There is a workaround which involves triggering stored procedures to do raw SQL inserts. I'm going to show you that in a second because that also works for SQL DBs and it's a really good idea for bulk record changes. But just by if you want to do like what single row data manipulation, you need a little bit of a workaround to get the warehouses to work. You'll need those stored procedures. You don't need stored procedures with Fabric SQL DB. Another perk of using Fabric SQL DBs as opposed to warehouses is that Fabric SQL DBs also support identity columns. So if you're building a comment table and you want to have an auto-incrementing identity column, the first comment created should have the ID 1, and the next one the ID 2, and the third one ID 3. You can make the database auto-populate that column for you. With Fabric warehouses, identity columns are not supported, and you'll need to code that logic inside of your Power Apps if you want to build that. And it's not a very easy thing, actually, to build an identity column with logic that is foolproof and doesn't risk conflicts if two users submit comments at the same time. So it's just way easier for you to work with Fabric SQL DBs as the data destination for your write-back solutions as opposed to Fabric warehouses. even though Fabric warehouses technically do work and might be slightly cheaper to use from a Fabric compute perspective. So just to summarize the basic building blocks here, and I know I'm repeating myself a little, but it's because I want you to remember those things. If you want to do write back to SQL from Power BI, you start by building a Power BI report that needs some kind of write back functionality. Then you create a Power Apps for Power BI visualization. You add the columns that you want to pass from your semantic model to your Power App. Then you either choose an existing app or create a new app, open that in a new window, and then you start building your app using a combination of the Power BI integration data source and whatever Fabric SQL database data source that you add in here. On the screen itself, you'll need to learn a little bit of Power FX. I suggest checking out YouTube videos. I have a couple of articles on my blog for code examples if you're getting stuck. But it's pretty easy to get started with just creating a simple user interface like this. And I really encourage you to do that and try to do so. Whew. All right, that was me talking for 20-25 minutes straight, and this is the perfect time to check in with the chat. Deepthi, are there any questions we need to cover at this point?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. So the
Sure.
first question, Christiane asks, so is it necessary the database be ready, like pre-processing done for the use?
I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, but you will need to have the database before you get started with this. So you could say before even creating the report, you will need to create the database first of all, right? So the database needs to be up and live, both for you to be able to connect to from your semantic model and from Power Apps. And frankly, I can show you exactly what it looks like, right? I can show you the SQL DB that I've created just once more. If I have demo database here, I just have a couple of tables that I've created here. I actually just used Copilot to help me with the SQL scripts to create these different tables, and they are right here for you to see.
So I have a question, like this is my question. Can we use the data gateways and connect to the on-prem SQL server? Or is it
Sure.
does
Yeah, that works. That works. So there might be a little bit of a delay, right? But and you'll need to use the gateway both for your Power App and for your Power BI report. But yeah, that works.
Good. So okay. So another question from Cynthia. What are the performance implications of adding Power App write back capacity to Power BI reports?
Great question. I love those kind of questions because I truly understand where you're coming from. The good thing is, as mentioned before, the Power App just underneath the hood, there's of course a little bit of a layer on top of it, but underneath the hood, it's just a table visual with all the pros and cons that entails, right? So the Power App itself doesn't really add any performance implications, but it is a table underneath. And you know, if you're a Power BI developer, that if you're building very long or very wide tables, that does impact performance of your Power BI report. But if you keep it pretty slim, you're not gonna see any issues with performance in your Power BI report stemming from adding this. It's about the same as adding a table visual with the same columns.
Thank you. So Ishan asks, can patch be used instead of update if in the code?
That was a good question, and I think I mentioned it very briefly actually at the end that indeed you can use patch instead of update if. You can use a form. So some of you are maybe used to building Power Apps using forms, and there's a command called submit form. If you've connected your form to a SQL database, you can use that instead as well. Are there any more ways? Update if, patch. Those are the ones I can remember off the top of my head. And then of course stored procedures, but we'll get to that after this intermission.
Yeah, thank you. Just two more questions, like long,
Sure.
short here. But do you have a forecasting example?
Do I have a forecasting example? Not one I can show, only one that was built for a client. I have, what examples do I have that I could maybe show? Let me just check right here because it's a good question. Obviously, I fully understand why you might want to see other examples here. have another report right here. If this will, okay, nothing's working on this one. Apologies for that. I found the wrong one. It's called Fabric Demo Report. Mhm. Okay, there's something wrong with the backend for this visual. Unfortunately, I didn't double check that these were working before starting the show, as I didn't prepare or yeah. So I don't have another great example just to show you right here. Maybe I can find one at the end. I have maybe yeah. No, we'll leave that for the end if there is time. Apologies for that,
Yeah,
but it is a common
sure.
use case.
Thank you. Yeah. Shankar Srinivasan asks, how does this approach compare against the latest tran translytical task flows? What is the recommended guidelines to select the right approach across all these options available?
I completely get that question. Um, Maybe the next things I'm going to show you are also going to help convince you, but I think that if you are a Power BI developer who's comfortable with SQL, there are no reasons to change to translytical task flows. Translytical, well, that could be, but translytical task flows require you to write Python, whereas these solutions here, well, to use the stored procedures that I'm going to show you in a second, will require you obviously to know a little bit of SQL, which I think more Power BI developers probably do know. Translytical task flows are in quite early preview. They're in public preview, but there's a lot of limitations around what you can do. Um, it only works with certain types of input options. So if I were to use a translytical task flow, I would have no way of creating, for example, a date picker. In Power Apps, I just go in and I insert a date picker, and my end users, they'll be able to choose a date. This would not be possible with a translytical task flow. If I had to do like multi-screen navigation stuff, that also would be very difficult to build with translytical task flows because they have very limited options for that as well. What translytical task flows do very well is that they eliminate the need for the Power Platform. So you can build write-back solutions using only Fabric and Power BI. You don't need Power Apps anymore because all you'll be doing is writing Python functions, user data functions in your workspaces, and then you'll be configuring slicers and buttons inside of Power BI to interact with those user data functions. If we have time at the end, maybe I can show you a quick demo. Otherwise, I have a presentation at another user group in a couple of weeks where that maybe you can find if you find me on LinkedIn, where I'll be showing a little more about that. My preference so far, personally, and this is just my own opinion. If you have the money for Power Apps licenses, I would go with Power Apps. Maybe that changes a couple of years from now when translytical task flows they mature a little more. Sorry, there's a little long answer, long description for a short answer. All right.
Uh, yeah, this session will be available later for viewing. I will be posting it on YouTube channel. So keep out watching for that. I'll provide you the details later in the chat window. But please go ahead and continue, John.
Sounds great. So we already covered most of these things. Um, I wanted to just briefly share with you some limitations and considerations of Power Apps. You need to be aware that CI/CD and embedded Power Apps is not very easy. So if you are working with Power BI reports that go through dev, test, production, and you have an embedded Power App that you wish to also go through dev, test, and production, the native Power BI deployment pipelines, for example, they don't allow you to deploy the Power App simultaneously. So you'll need to maintain a separate way of deploying your Power App at the same time as you deploy your Power BI reports, or have manual intervention, right? You can build custom code pipelines in Azure DevOps, but otherwise it's going to be a manual exercise. Just good to know. It's really hard to make pixel perfect reports. Maybe you noticed, but I have these black bars around my Power App, and I can resize this. But before I created my app, I didn't know how much space this was going to take, and all of a sudden I have this blank space. So now I need to compensate to make it look nice, right? And If you have a more complex report than this can be quite a hassle. You maybe have very intentional design patterns on your page. You have a background you created in Figma or something, and it's annoying that all of a sudden your beautiful Power App is showing up with these weird black bars. It is just a fact that it's really complicated to make pixel perfect Power Apps. You'll need to tweak it and figure out the sizing of the app. You can change the size of your Power App by going into the properties of your app object, and you can say, well, the screen height and width should be something specific. You can also make it dynamic, and you can make it auto scaling, and well, you should play around with that. I have a blog article that details it a little more. And then another point here is the license complexity that I mentioned before. And finally, I didn't include that, but there is actually a little bit of a row limit to this integration. I told you that this one acts like a table visual, and that's true, except that table visual, when you use it in Power Apps, only the first 1,000 rows of your table will be sent to the Power App. So you cannot use the Power App very easily. There are some sneaky workarounds, but you cannot very easily use the Power App to search everything in your semantic model. It will only be able to search the first 1,000 records that you are passing to it. So just be aware of that. If you're searching directly, however, in the backend, and you can of course do that, circumvent the semantic model, then there is no problem at all. All right. The next thing I wanted to tell you about is the slightly more advanced scenario here of using stored procedures in Power Apps. And you can do this in your write-back apps, but you can also do it in standalone Power Apps. So I'm just going to show you, I have a database here. It's not this one, it was the other one. Let me just find that again. In my database here, I have a couple of stored procedures that I have created before building my Power App. Then I have a Power App that I can open separately. Let me just not save that one. Open a new Power App. Apps. It's the stored procedures app. All right. And what I want to show is that in addition, when you're in Power Apps in here, in addition to adding your SQL server, you can actually use that connection string of your database to just find that connection string to connect to those stored procedures directly from your Power App and trigger them from inside the Power App, which is super powerful. So if I go into databases and find DemoDB, open in SSMS. Let me just get that server name again. So here is another Power App. If I go into data, I click add data, and again, I search for SQL Server. I can use my existing credentials, provide the server name, provide the database name, click connect. I could choose the tables like I did before, but I can also choose the tab called stored procedures, and I can add those stored procedures directly to the list of data available for my Power App. And I can trigger those through buttons, etc. And I just want to show you what this looks like. So right now in my demo DB, let's go into that one. I have this table called sales data, and if I say select star from, let's just go ahead and do that. We can see there are 500 rows right now in sales data. That's good to know. In here, I have added these stored procedures that I have created to my Power App. Let's say I wanted to send not one record, but 500 records at a time to this backend. I have a little bit of Power FX code here that allows me to generate 500 randomized rows of data. I can clear it or regenerate it. And then I have another save button here, which calls my demo database dot the name of my stored procedure. And then it passes a variable that I call JSON, which is a JSON object of this collection of 500 records. And then in my demo database, what does that stored procedure look like? Well, the stored procedure, it takes one parameter, which is a JSON varchar max, and then it unpacks this JSON through an open JSON formula and inserts those 500 records into my sales data table. And it won't look like much when I do it, but when I click save here, it's going to take a second to just trigger that stored procedure. You can see the little ants are flying across my screen and not very big, but it completed there. That took what, 2 or 3 seconds? Maybe you think that's not very impressive. If I query this now, you should see there are 1,000 rows. There's now 1,000 rows, so you can see the 500 records got saved. What's crazy here is that we just saved 500 records of data from a Power App to a Fabric SQL database. If I had to do this through a patch statement or an update if statement, I could be treating waters for 3 minutes. That's going to take 3 minutes, no kidding, to patch 500 records. And we just did that in 3 seconds using a stored procedure. So if you are ever in the situation that you're working with Power Apps standalone or as a write-back solution in a Power BI report where you need to generate or forecast, maybe you want to calculate 200 different values based on 3 inputs made by the user, you should make your backend do the heavy lifting through stored procedures rather than trying to make the little bit of compute that a Power App has do the heavy lifting. Push that performance hit to the database and let the database engine do its magic. It's super efficient and you can patch hundreds of records in seconds this way. Just to sort of elaborate on this use case with stored procedures, I have a secondary page here where I can use my Power App to orchestrate other operations in my backend. So in addition to that sales data table I have here, I also have a sales data history table, which right now has, let's see how many rows are in here. There's 1,000 rows in there. Well, I have another stored procedure called snapshot sales data, which I could use to make a copy of my entire sales data table. All it takes is one variable created by, and then it selects all the data in my sales data table and inserts it into the sales data history, adding a timestamp and a created by value. This is useful if you're ever in a situation where you design a write-back solution where there is a controller or some administrator who needs to create snapshots or freeze a window of data so that you cannot edit it anymore. I've had so many write-back solutions where somebody needs to freeze the current view, and then next month's input could be going. A common use case for this is financial inputting scenarios, right? I've built a lot of write-back Power Apps for month-end closure or year-end closure in finance, and they always want to make sure that they can make a snapshot of the data and then they can input stuff on it. So you can build like a control panel that the administrator can use to create a snapshot and say now it's open for entry, and then you could use another stored procedure to close this snapshot for entry afterwards by setting another parameter. You can be creative with how you build that. But from the Power App, what this looks like, again, it's not much, but if I click snapshot here, it'll again take a few seconds to run. But if I now query my table again, okay, for some reason that didn't work. It should have triggered this this snapshot stored procedure. Maybe it's not done. Let's just see one more time. It still only shows 1,000 rows of data. Let me see if I can troubleshoot this. I was using the wrong connection. Okay, that's why. It's using my warehouse instead of my demo DB. So let me just say demo database dot, I need this one. Snapshot sales data. We're gonna need that part. Okay. Oh, let me comment that out in case I ever need to show it for a warehouse again. Now it should work. Let's trigger the snapshot. It's done. And if we go in now, we just got another snapshot of snapshots worth of data in there. So I can use the stored procedures. I can orchestrate them from inside the app as well. Now, the third kind of mind-blowing thing that I wanted to show you is that, well, another property of stored procedures is, well, they can also return data back to the Power App. So I just mentioned to you before, there's this issue that Power BI can only send 1,000 records to Power Apps through that link, right? There's another limitation in Power Apps that goes for any kind of data source that normally you can only, where is that? It's somewhere in the settings, data row limit. Normally, if you query a data source, you can only get 500 records of data. You can set this to 2,000, but that's the hard limit. What if I wanted to display many more records than that? Well, you can actually use result sets of stored procedures to circumvent this limitation. So here I have another Power App where I have a gallery that is just looking at a stored procedure. So I'm using the DBO get sales data stored procedure that I have in here. What does this do? Well, it just says select star from sales data and select star from sales data history. And these two different result sets are available for me to use through this syntax that you see here. So I can change between result set 1 and result set 2. And depending on which one I choose, table 2, remember that was the sales data history, I'm getting 2,000 records because that's exactly what we saw there is in the history table. And if I query table 1, there's only 1,000 records. Now if I trigger my snapshot table once more, I'm going to store another snapshot of the entire sales data table in my sales history table. So now if I go in and query sales data history, there's going to be 3,000 rows. And if I go back into Power Apps now and again show table 2, I have 3,000 items in my gallery, even though the limit is supposed to be 2,000 or even 500 for this the settings that I have in my app. So you can actually use stored procedures in Fabric SQL DBs. This will work in warehouses too, but you can use this to circumvent limitations that otherwise always goes for Power Apps. And this is a little crazy to do, right? It does come with a little bit of a warning when you want to do this and you set up a connection. Let me just make sure I'm picking the right one here, the demo DB. You'll need to check this box, save to use for galleries and tables. If you don't check this one, you cannot do what I just showed you. It'll give you an error if you try to return a result set. And if you read on this learn more, the reason for this is, well, you can royally screw up the performance of your Power App if you accidentally try to query a result set that returns a million rows of data. Your Power App will crash because it can't handle that. But I have, with no issue, been using this to query 20,000, 30,000 rows of records. So if you have that weird use case, you can do that. And my point here was just to show you through these three different examples that Power Apps, whether they're standalone or whether they're embedded in a Power BI report, one thing is you can do the basic write back with patch and update functions. As soon as you start triggering stored procedures and passing variables and passing JSON objects or even just orchestrating your backend, you can use Power BI and Power Apps to do crazy data manipulation directly in your Fabric backend if you want to. Because of course, this comes with a little bit of a risk, right? You should of course only do this if you know what you're doing. You should probably not allow your users to change your master data directly in a production database through these means, right? But for these entry solutions where you want to create snapshots and you want to bulk update or extrapolate a forecast from a single entry or something like that, let SQL and stored procedures do the heavy lifting. I think that's the main message I want to get across here. Whew. That was again a lot of talking, and now's the next obvious time to have a look at the chat, DV, if there's anything to cover there.
I didn't see any more coming up. So
okay. I just want to then take the chance to maybe talk a little bit of governance about these solutions here. So whenever you work with these solutions, you'll need to, of course, license both the Power BI users and the Power Apps users. So if for some reason a user opens up a Power BI report that has an embedded Power App and they don't have a Power Apps license, the Power App will fail to load and they'll be told you don't have a license. Then they will probably just come asking, but be aware that you need to assign them a license. You also need to share the Power App with them. So you will need to go into Power App Studio and you will need to share the Power App with the users of your Power BI report. And thirdly, depending on the data source that you're using or the way you're connecting to it, you might also need to share the destination data source with them. Now, in my case, I am using my credentials to authenticate to the Fabric SQL DB. If you were using another SQL server, Azure SQL Server, you could use, single sign-on credentials. You could use just SQL credentials. there are many ways of authenticating. You could also even use a service principal. You do need to consider, of course, how are you going to let your users authenticate. And I think a valid point here is also that when you are building these Power Apps, whether you are coding all of the updates from in Power FX in the Power App, or whether you're using stored procedures, you are fully responsible for making sure that the data entries you are making with the app are within full integrity of your destination. So you need to make sure they fulfill all requirements to primary keys and foreign keys. You need to make sure to log those important columns with the created and modified timestamps created by all of that. You need to make sure that it's done. With Fabric SQL databases, you can create columns that do some of that stuff for you. But if you're using a warehouse, for example, as I mentioned earlier, those identity columns are not possible, so you'd need to manually create that. If you forget to or don't know how to create the created by columns, all of that jazz, you'll need to do that manually from the Power App. You have the responsibility as the creator of write-back Power Apps to make sure that you're not just outputting a stupid table with no integrity, with no history, with no logging or tracing. So please do future you and your colleagues a favor and think these things into your solutions from the start. I'm getting hired as a consultant so often to help troubleshoot write-back Power Apps where these things either don't exist or they are an afterthought, and they have weird issues with duplicate entries in their backend. Maybe they have no idea who edited a key record in their production database because there's no logging on the solution whatsoever. Those things. Just promise me that with great power comes great responsibility, and that you are aware of that. That this is it's incredibly powerful to let Power BI report use interact directly with your backend, but you do need to be careful when you do it. I think that's the key message I want to leave you with here at the very end of this presentation. We're reaching the end here, Deepthi, and I just want to make sure that if there are any other unanswered questions left in the chat.
No, we do not have any questions left, but we are nearing by 1 hour. So
Yes. Okay. So then I just want to share this slide just again. If anybody missed it in the beginning and want to connect, feel free to find me on LinkedIn. Maybe you have a cool use case you want to discuss, whether it's feasible or you have a technical issue. Perhaps I can help you with that. And also, if you're looking for more specific step-by-step guides on how to build these Power Apps, you can find all of that on my blog shown on the link here. So all left for me here is to say thank you so much. And I don't know, Deepthi, if you have a couple of slides you want to show here at the end for everybody.
no, we do not have any additional
Okay.
site, but thank you so much, John. This is a really great session. I'm sure people who missed this session, they will definitely come back and see on our YouTube channel. But guys, please follow the YouTube channel because we are going to upload our latest videos out there. If in case you missed attending them, you can always catch up on our YouTube channel. And do not forget to register for our Data Summit, which is going to be on September 24th. So we are all excited, very excited for the conference as well. So yeah, John, thank you so much once again. And if anybody don't have any more questions, I think it's time for our wrap up for today. And we will see you next week with a new session.
That's perfect. Thank you so much
Okay.
for having me on the user group again. It's really exciting to present to you. And thank you for all the great questions, especially in the beginning of the session. That's awesome with that kind of interactivity. So thank you. I had a lot of fun.
Yep. Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and stop the recording and